All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking podcast. Before we get into this week's episode, which I think you're going to find exciting and informative, just want to say a quick thank you shout out to people who support this podcast on Patreon. Patreon's a crowdfunding platform where you can chip in a couple of bucks every month. You get to hear the episodes early before they come out, and you get to keep the lights on and keep things running here, which is useful for the continuation of the podcast. So appreciate that. If you're able to support it, it's patreon.com/Seth Ashworth. Go over there, check it out. And this week I've got a young man who you will no doubt have seen if you follow kayaking on Instagram. He paddles a green boat, which is definitely the video you're going to have seen him in. He's recently been backwheeling everything and cobra flipping everything. Very creative with his downriver freestyle kayaking. And I've known him for a long time, and I've been trying to organize this podcast for a long time. So I'm excited that we're finally getting it done. Welcoming to the show today, Kaelin Friedenson. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Kaelin, you're a young lad. Not everyone's heard of you, so why don't you start us off with how old are you, where are you from, and when did you start kayaking?
Yeah, so I'm a 18-year-old kayaker from Washington, D.C. I pretty much grew up next to the river. My dad used to kayak a little, and he kind of just got me on the water as much as possible, and I kind of fell in love with the sport there.
And how old were you when you started?
I would say I think I got my first boat when I was around 3 or 4, but
Wow.
I was in my dad's lap before that on the river.
What was your first boat?
I think it was an Axiom.
What was the first boat you can remember paddling?
Yeah, I think it was a small Axiom.
Small Axiom.
Some kind of small, like, kid's dagger boat. I can't remember if it was actually an Axiom or something like that.
Now, 18 years old, what does that mean? You were born in 2004?
2003.
Wow. Just going to let that sink in for some of the older people listening here. So it's really interesting, Kaelin. You're part of this generation of kids that grew up with like boats and equipment made to be their size. Like when I learned to kayak, I was like probably 13 or 14, and I had this really old Perception Dancer, and it had like little plastic foot pedals, and they, even at the shortest setting, it kind of wasn't really the right size for me. But you're part of this new generation now of kids who have had kids kayaks from the very start, and they've had like paddles that are the right size. Not like I had this like big monster like aluminium plastic paddle that was super heavy and it had a 90-degree offset. And progression's obviously a lot slower when you are trying to overcome those like gear things. So it's really interesting to see people of your generation who've had access to like kind of good equipment from the get-go. I guess that's probably not something you would have thought about that much, like when you were growing up.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really have to think about it too much, but I was definitely aware that, people who are older and they don't have the smaller kayaks when they were younger. But I definitely think it's really nice having gear that fits you, because then obviously you're using the best equipment you can to get better and improve.
Yeah, and I think also you probably had access to more like dry tops that were your size, and helmets that were your size and stuff like that, right? Like, so it was you had a pretty long paddling season.
Yeah, exactly. I was able to have the gear that I guess I needed to be comfortable and happy on the water when I was younger, which really made it easier to just be out on the water more.
And so that is probably part of the thing we can attribute to some of your success here, is that you had just had access to like better fitting gear, so you're able to progress more. But you've been paddling really a lot, like since you were pretty young, right? Like probably I first met you when you were like 12 or 13, I guess, at Keena's.
Yeah.
So tell us about what, like roughly, how did your like trajectory of like learning to paddle start? Like obviously you're from Washington D.C., so your home river is the Potomac.
Yeah, Potomac River is basically, I guess I moved when I was around 13 or 14, and now I can walk to the river. It takes about 5 minutes from where I train slalom.
And were you training slalom like with the local club, or like what's your deal there? Kind of what I'm looking for is like walk us through how you're progressing as a young teenager. Like how did you make those progression steps to where we're at now, and then we'll talk about where you're at now.
Yeah, so it's mostly just been growing up next to the river and just having that river there and basically getting out as much as I can. I have a local club. Now it's right, they practice right where I live. So there's a coach, a slalom coach, and I go out after school. I was going out before school when I was younger. And then just really getting out on the water as much as I can. I kind of was just in love with the water. So it was just kind of what I like to do. So I would always try and get out. And then as I grew up, just traveling around, my dad would always take me down to North Carolina for different events and getting that different type of whitewater.
And primarily when you were younger, you were
Like that.
doing
And then,
a mixture of stuff like racing slalom and doing freestyle stuff.
yeah, I've pretty much had a hard time picking one. So pretty much since the beginning, it's always just been doing everything. I don't do as much freestyle now as I would like, but I still really enjoy doing it and trying to get.
Sorry, man, you were just breaking up a little bit in your answer there, but I think you were saying that you've done everything the whole time, and it's been difficult to kind of be focused on one like aspect of whitewater kayaking.
Yeah. I kind of just like having everything, every boat with me, and just being able to do all different kinds of kayaking, and I think it helps throughout different types of kayaking to get better and looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you 100% on that. Like when I was younger, when I was about your age, actually, when I was like 18, where I grew up in Southwest London was I lived 10 minutes away probably from a little slalom spot called Shepperton, which is a really small. It's called a weir. It's like the outflow of this dam, or of a lock system, which like this how they like let water go up and down for the boats to go through. So we would paddle slalom like 3 nights a week. If the water was good, there was like a good freestyle spot about 30 minutes away. So I too was doing kind of everything, and I think that's attributed. It sets you up to succeed really well, right? You got way better boat control skills, like more accurate boat control skills. Your river reading skills are like improving all the time just through that repetition of slalom, right? Because even though you're in the same piece of white water, just by moving those poles fractionally, it changes the experience a lot, right? Do you think that kind of set you up really well to succeed for some of the creaking that you've gone on to do?
Yeah, I think so. I think having that ability and that confidence to put your boat where it needs to go um, can help you so much in creaking, because creaking is finding a line and then hitting that line. So in slalom, when you're practicing making sure your boat's in that right position, it's a lot easier going over into a creek boat and just making sure you can hit that line.
Definitely, I think a lot of people kind of step on slalom because it seems like sometimes you're on flat water or you're on the smallest ripples, um, but it sets you up so well to succeed down the line, or it set me up very well to succeed, and it looks like it's setting you up very well to succeed too. And I know you've gone on to be pretty competitive with your slalom, so let's kind of fast forward the clock a little bit. We've been talking about you as a youth, but let's talk about your slalom racing now. Or actually, stop for a second, rewind. What's the slalom scene like in the US? Like where I grew up in England, there's like this really structured tier system of racing, where there's like different divisions and you get promoted at once you win a certain amount of races, or you podium a certain number of races, you get ranked in a point system and you can promote gradually over time. Is it similar in the US?
It's actually quite different in the US. So most of Europe, slalom is really big, and there's a lot of different athletes in every country, and it's quite difficult to make the team. But in the US, slalom is a lot smaller, and we still have really good athletes that are making finals. But like the number of our field in the US is a lot smaller. We have about six like athletes who are top tier, and then about that. Sorry, someone just knocked on my door.
Go ahead, man. We can take a pause. You're good, buddy?
Yeah.
So sorry, we were talking about like the differences between slalom in the US versus like Europe and the UK.
Right. Yeah, so in the US there aren't as many athletes, but there are still some top tier athletes, just not as many, really.
How many races like per season are there like domestically in the US?
So in usually there's a team trials in the springtime, and at some point a nationals. Last summer or last year it was in the summer. So normally about two big races nationally, and then there's some smaller local races. So like for instance, our club has I think about 3 or 4 just local races per year, and I think a couple other clubs host local races as well. So there's some races if you want to go to them.
Okay, so it's out there, but it's not as structured. You've got to kind of seek it out a bit more.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting for me because like it's really centralized in the UK system is it's pretty easy to hop in, hop out of, and there's like a similar idea of like local races, but it adds to like a national ranking scheme, which is pretty neat. So it's crazy that the US, as you say, like this is still a successful slalom nation. Like there's athletes who are in the world championships and making finals, but without the backing of like a big like domestic organization.
Yeah, you got to put in a lot more work behind the scenes to be really competitive in the US, and I guess being on the US team and throughout the world.
And then, so what we were going on to talk about there was where you're at with Slalom right now, because obviously you were racing a lot when you were a kid. Like, what are you doing with Slalom right now? I know you're racing a lot, but why don't you just fill people in on some of the races or some of the things you've been doing with Slalom since
So this
being a little
past
old.
summer, so this past summer was a really big year for me in slalom. I did my biggest race was the Junior World Championships, where I placed 11th, just missing finals. I missed finals by 0.02 seconds, or maybe 0.2 seconds, I think it was. It was like very close. And I just had a few touches that messed me up there. But then I also did a bunch of other races, European Cup races, where I finished top 3 in most of them. I won a few of them, and those are kind of just like junior races. They normally have most of the top junior athletes in Europe, but obviously it's not as competitive as the World Championships. And then at the end of the summer, I did some of the senior races. I got a chance to be on the senior team. I was the 4th spot at team trials, and one of the athletes wasn't competing, so I got to step up for the second half of the season. And I competed in 2 senior World Cups, which was a really crazy experience for me. Just my first 2 senior World Cups, seeing all the athletes, and it was crazy. It's a really great experience there.
What was the craziest thing about it? Because obviously you're literally on a start line against a bunch of people who are like just coming off the Olympics, and
Yeah, exactly.
we're like right at the you're 18 years old. Like I can't imagine. Can you fill in like how does it feel to like sit in the starting pool, warming up with a bunch of people who are like just off the Olympics or have been multiple Olympians?
It was a crazy atmosphere there. Like there were just some insane athletes that I've only seen on on the TV or on YouTube just in races previously, and it's crazy just to like actually go there, and then I'm warming up and Peter Kaiser's warming up right next to me or something like that. It's crazy. And same with when you're training, because normally you get put in training slots with a different country, and like for example we were with the Slovenians at Senior Worlds, and was training with like Tine and some crazy athletes. So it was it was really cool just being there, like for my first time. Now it won't be as surprising the second time, but it's all your first time there, meeting all those athletes. It's always crazy. It's just like
Did you have any heavy like fanboy moments? Like, oh my god.
I definitely. So my first time I saw Kauser and my first time I saw Yuri I was just kind of like, oh my god, like freaking out inside, like trying not to make a scene, and Evie was making fun of me. It was pretty funny, but um, yeah, I don't know. I was just like
Did you manage to
so
play it
cool to
cool?
see.
Like play it off like, yeah, yo.
Yeah, of course. I was keeping it calm, keeping it contained, but
Yeah, I honestly can't imagine what it might what like well, I've got a rough idea of what it's like to see a bunch of people on videos and then to meet them in person, like but
yeah,
to be that combined with and also I'm at this it, basically the top level event in slalom, right? Like it's crazy. That is
yeah. It's like
pretty it must be pretty
playing
special.
basketball with LeBron James.
Exactly, yeah,
Like,
exactly, man. You're pretty much right there, and yeah, that's pretty intense. And so are you hoping to go to the Olympics with that? Like, what's your future with that look like?
yeah. So right now I'm pushing pretty hard for 2024 in Paris. But I want to do that with all this other kayaking. I'm kind of doing right now. I've kind of made a decision that like, yes, it's definitely something I want to do, but if it requires me to kind of stop my other kayaking, I'm not willing to go that far, I guess. But I'm right now training pretty regularly and consistently at home and able to like paddle in the fall. So it's right now it's kind of working out, being able to do everything. So I'm pretty excited about that.
So
And sorry, sorry.
sorry to cut you off, man, but last year you
Yeah,
went from a two massive, like almost the highest level slalom competitions there are, and then you went straight down to Mexico, or almost it felt like straight down to Mexico to do uh, back wheel off of Tomata One. Sorry, back freewheel off Tomata One, back freewheel off of Twisted Pleasure, which I don't think anyone's done before, and Cobra Flip on Side Chick, which I don't know if anyone's done before. For people who are not following along with what we're talking about right now, it's like downriver freestyle kayaking, right? So doing moves, doing freestyle moves as you go downstream. But you somehow had this creative idea to do those down 60-foot waterfalls or 40-foot waterfalls, respectively. What possessed you to do that? Like, what bet did you have to lose to do that?
well, I guess for me, like I've been doing so much freestyle off smaller drops throughout the whole year, just living on the Potomac. The downriver freestyle potential of Great Falls is just crazy. And especially if you have the right crew, you can just push limits. And the more that I got better, and the more that I realized that at these limits that might have been, unthinkable, like now they're actually, they're in reach. And thinking about that all year and really just kind of putting into my mind how the trick's going to go and all that just gave me the confidence. And I had the confidence in my abilities to pull off the trick. And then from there, it's just dealing with your fears and actually executing it, and executing the skills that and you get to celebrate at the bottom.
So let's talk about one in particular. There's you were on a tear, like an absolute. And if people don't know, they can go back and look at your Instagram. It's you were on an absolute tear on that Mexico trip. But the one that stood out to me was the Twisted Pleasure back free wheel, and that's I've run that waterfall at way back in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were like 7 years old or something, and I remember it was scary, and I remember like just I had a good line. I remember Joel had almost a very bad line, like right at the entrance there. It's like one of the hardest entrances to a big waterfall, certainly that I've run. Not that there is, but it definitely is a challenging entrance maneuver. What? How did you get the fear? Like, obviously, you know you're going to pull it off, but how did you? What was your self talk to get yourself to be like, okay, I'm going to go for it?
It's really hard, like when you're above a big drop, to actually calm yourself down and get yourself in a place where you can perform at your best. And it's something I've been dealing with for a while, as I've been doing competitions since I was 10 or 12 years old. And it's really just coming down to accepting the fear and kind of just putting it aside for when you're actually kayaking. And sometimes it takes just a second sitting there in the eddy, just kind of talking to yourself, just calming yourself down, or taking a deep breath. I know my back wheel on Tomata One, I was so scared, and normally I'm pretty good about getting myself calmed down before the drop, before I peel out of the eddy, but for some reason I just couldn't. And I took a nice deep breath about 5 seconds before the lip, and that's when I just kind of calmed down and I was able to just pull off the trick.
When you're having these moments of like self talk, what do you say to yourself?
it's it's really more just, I kind of feel this weird stress because you really kind of like get into your head a little, and I really just try to kind of breathe, just say that I'm fine. I know what I'm doing. Just kind of talk through what I'm about to do in my head, kind of distract myself a little from the fear of like what actually is going to happen, and just think about all I'm thinking about is what I need to do when I go off the lip.
Have you read The Art of Rise of Superman by Stephen Kotler?
I have not.
It's a book about flow state in extreme sports. It's really, really interesting. I like highly recommend it. But he talks about like forcing yourself into that state that you're just talking about, where all you're thinking about is what you've got to do to achieve your goal, right? And if everyone should read it if they haven't read it and they like kayaking, because I think it's fascinating. But I want to try and pick in a little bit more about how you are able to kind of calm down. And we've talked about some deep breaths, like right at the lip. We've talked about telling yourself what you've got to do. Are there any other like tactics that you use to help keep yourself get to that kind of flow state, the zone?
Yeah, I would say kind of just really understanding your fear is a really big thing that I think is really important in kayaking, and it's just understanding like the reason why you're scared of what you're about to do, and be a little bit more logical about it, because I think a lot of the times people are scared of things for no reason, or at least they're that reason that they're scared of it can be minimize the risk or something like that. So I think just understanding why you're so scared is really important, and then you can go from there and figure out ways that best can help you, do the thing that you want to do. And another thing I think people struggle with is fighting your fear, because it's not something you can fight. At least for me, like when I'm doing slalom races, I get really scared before the race, normally about once, and it comes in like, and I'm not always sure when it's going to come. It'll come in maybe an hour before my race at some point, and it's really nice to just let that fear run its course. You just got to let it in, be scared for however much time, and then you let that run through, and then it's time to go.
Can we just go back to something you were saying a second ago? So you were talking about understanding like why you're scared of something, and could you maybe give an example of that?
Yeah, of course. So I think a great example is getting stuck in a hole that ends in a pool. And if it's not a big hole, there aren't any rocks around, there really isn't a logical reason to be scared of that. And I think a lot of people are scared of surfing big holes because it's a big water feature. It's powerful, it's scary, has a lot of, energy and power in there. And you could it's hard to really, think about it when you're out paddling, because then it's easier to assess, what you can logically be scared of, or what doesn't make sense to be scared.
I just lost you for a second there, buddy, but I think you were just saying about people don't want to get surfed in a hole that ends in a pool. And could you take us back from there?
Yeah.
Sorry, you just broke up.
Yeah. So I think, something a lot of people are scared of is getting surfed in a big hole. But if you kind of break that down and you practice getting surfed in holes where that isn't as dangerous, like if there's a big pool at the bottom where it doesn't really matter if you swim, I think it's a really great way of kind of, building up that self-confidence and really understanding what is dangerous and what is scary, and being able to look at that rapid differently.
I love that. I think that's something that a lot of people really are fighting with when they're thinking about, they can't articulate like what they're scared of, right? And then maybe it helps a lot to just say the things out loud, and then
Yeah.
once you say it out loud, it's almost like you're detaching from it, so you're able to look at it from an outside point of view and be like, well, now that I say it out loud, that doesn't make sense at all. But to like kind of externalize that like internal dialogue is really a good tool. I think that's really great. Something else you just said there was about kind of iterative steps in your skills and abilities, and you kind of touched on it earlier when we were talking about the potential, like the downriver freestyle potential of Great Falls, so of your like local class 4, class 5 waterfalls. Can
Yeah.
you talk about some of the steps you've been taking that built up to like 60-foot back freewheel?
Yeah. So I think for me, I'm always trying to think about how tricks work. I think about rapids a lot differently than most people. At least just when I'm talking about rapids with people, it seems like I'm thinking about them a little bit differently. And I think the way I kind of like to look at it is just like breaking down the rapid. You want to look at obviously all the different types of water and stuff like that. But when I'm trying tricks, I want to know if I can get down safely if something goes wrong that I'm not really expected of. And I think on Tomata 1, there was a great example of that. I did 2 back free wheels off that one. The first one, I hit my boat on the lip weird and was still able to save my bow. And I think it's really important to know that you can still save whatever goes wrong, and having that ability, that skill to pull back, whatever, because you can't expect it to go wrong. You just have to know that you can trust yourself to be able to deal with whatever's about to go wrong if something goes wrong. And a lot of times something doesn't go wrong, but it's just having that skill to deal with that, because then once you know you can do that, it's a lot easier to try things because you're a lot less scared of really getting hurt. And on Great Falls, there are some moves that could be dangerous potentially, but the more you can try and the more you break down the moves, there's some that aren't as dangerous, and you get better at the specific move you're trying to work on or whatever, and you can kind of build up and try it on different things that maybe have a little bit more risk, but it's a better spot to try it. And I guess for me, the whole year was just working on back freewheels and kind of thinking about what would happen with an extra, 40, 45 feet of air, and kind of dealing with that and really like burning it into my mind about what I need to do halfway down to get my bow down and have a soft and safe landing.
Yeah, that's so important, right? They're thinking about like what you're doing and then how that's going to translate. But I think it's really great the way that you just kind of described your build up to it was that you're taking these steps. You're doing a back freewheel on like a 5 foot or a 10 foot or a 20 foot drop. Like one at a time, and really getting mastery at that one level before you try it somewhere else. So that when you try it the next place, you can already do it pretty good. Somewhere more safe and a bit smaller. And I think a lot of people, maybe because of social media, maybe not, but they feel like they have to rush into, they do a step, but they're not like maybe the master of that step yet. So like, for example, just like descending a waterfall, right? Like people like run a 5 footer with a bad line and they're like, that was great. I can't wait to run a 10 footer. And it's like, actually, like it'd be better if you had perfect form on this 5 footer before 10 footer web before you moved on to a 20 footer. Like
Exactly, and that's kind of how you have to go with a lot of kayaking, because if you're not really crushing those lines on easier stuff, that's when it can get really dangerous when you move to something bigger and harder.
absolutely, and that kind of brings us back nicely to slalom, right? Like if you're not crushing the lines with basically almost flat water and not touching those gates, like how are you going to do it when the water's moving faster and the gates are harder?
Exactly, and I think it's really important to recognize that and say to yourself, yeah, like I'm not as comfortable in this type of water, and knowing that, because then you can push yourself in a way where it's safe and you can get better, and I think that's the fastest way to improve.
I think it's the fastest way to improve too. You're literally a living product of that, right? Like you're 18 now and you're like regularly paddling class 5 whitewater. You're regularly doing downriver freestyle tricks that no one else has ever done, or at least that I'm aware of. And that's a cool position to be in, right?
Yeah, I think it's really nice to see the product. I mean, I know the work that I put in, and it's just really nice to see that it's paying off, and it really does pay off if you put the work in. So
Do you feel like a lot of responsibility now, like a lot of like younger kids like starting to look up to you and think like, man, I want to be like Kaylin one day?
I think maybe we're getting there, but I don't know. I I had this funny experience on the river today. I was up surfing ambush at the top here in Columbus, Georgia, and I was with Abby, and the lady who was surfing as well was like asked what Abby's name was, and then she was like, "Oh, I know you. You're famous," and it was just really weird to me because I'm just not used to that at all. But I definitely remember a lot of people doing that today, and so it's just cool as I'm getting older, you know.
Yeah, man, I think it's the better you get, and especially like the age that you're kind of growing up in is like a lot of your kayaking has been on Instagram or on Facebook or whatever since you were young. So there's been more and more people who will have seen you on the periphery of their feed, like more and more and more, and so that's kind of building a generation of kayakers who, it's cool. Like more people know who you are, but also it's important to recognize that like, hey, you're kind of a role model already. Like you're 18 years old
Yeah,
now. Like
it's
you kind of need to be thinking about like, hey, like, am I doing all this for the right reasons? Like, is this still something I want to be doing? Like, does that weigh on you ever?
I think I definitely think about it a lot. I definitely think about it a lot, but I always know why I'm doing these tricks, and it's always nice to know that even if there was a camera wasn't there on any of the times I was doing tricks on in Mexico, I would still go for it. It's it's always hard to differentiate like why you're doing these tricks, but I think I think when you know why you're doing it, and I think that's when you know it's the right reason.
I'm so happy to hear you
for
say
whatever
that,
person
Kaylin.
it is.
That's so level-headed. Like, it's a really a great thing. I hope more people can take that away with their kayaking. Is no matter what level you're at, like you shouldn't just be doing it because somebody's filming you, right?
Exactly.
Amen. So let's go back to something I want to talk about. You mentioned you had a World Cup finish where you were 11th and you were 0.002 seconds away from making the finals.
Yeah. So that was Junior Worlds. And I had the fastest raw time. I just had 3 touches. So uh, I basically, even if I just didn't have one of those touches, I would have made finals and had a chance to, become junior world champion in slalom, which I think definitely was attainable, but sometimes it doesn't pan out.
Something I say quite a lot is like you either win or you learn. So what did you learn from
Exactly.
that experience?
So I definitely learned a lot about the competition and kind of what my race strategy should be, I guess. During that race, in heats, I kind of had a messy run. My goal was kind of to slow down a little bit, just because I really didn't need a fast run to make it through to the next round. I just needed a solid run, and that actually messed me up just because I wasn't used to paddling at that slower pace, just because of all my training has been at a higher pace. So it's important to know the circumstances that you're paddling, because then if those circumstances are different, it might mess you up a little. And then in semifinals, I was on a good run. I guess I wasn't, a few unlucky touches. I wasn't as aware of where my bow was as I should have been, and it just kept me out of the final. But I was still pretty happy with the runs. I put down some fast times, so
How has that outcome affected your training?
it's kind of just made me more motivated, I guess, in a way. I really think about touching the gates in training now, and I try to make it through the whole session without touching a single gate, and it's just kind of something that I'm working on now. It's something that I recognize that this is a problem. This kept me from a chance to win worlds, and something that I'm going to work on and fix.
When this is going way back and definitely not at the same level that you're at, but when I started racing, I was like the messiest. I was like I could go through a run, like a 20 gate run, and touch like 14 gates. It was like difficult for the people who were racing after me at some races I was at, probably like in my first season or my second season, and the guys I used to train with also were like, "All right, dude, come on, you're fast, but this is holding you back a lot." And so for like a whole summer, every time I had a touch, I had to do 10 push-ups. And so I was getting real good at push-ups until the end of the summer, where the time I figured out just that I don't know, half stroke a minute, or it feels like half stroke a minute, but it's actually a few strokes a minute less reps. And just keeping that cadence a little lower and having a way smoother run. And an improvement for sure. Definitely, still, I was never good enough to go to Premier Division, which is like the top division in England. But yeah, it took me a while to unlearn, being as fast as possible at the
Right.
expense of those touches, right? Because they do, 2 seconds a touch racks up pretty quick.
Oh yeah, those can kill you for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's talk about something else in slalom. Let's talk about extreme slalom or motocross racing, or
Yeah.
the plastic downriver format that the slalom committee is trying to get into the Olympics. Can you run us through people who have not been following this development of the sport? Like, what is extreme slalom? And you're the world champion at it. So why don't you give us the run through of how that occurred?
Yeah, so extreme slalom is basically a slalom race with 4 people on the course at once. They're in plastic boats up to 9 feet. And there's a course with, I think, 2 sets of upstream gates and a few downstream gates. And you go off the ramp at the same time, and it's the first 2 down qualify for the next round, basically. It's pretty simple. You just kind of go down, you bump your way down, and you have to do the course. If you miss a gate, you get disqualified. If you hit someone in the face, or there's some contact rules, but it's honestly pretty confusing about the contact rules specifically, but basically you just can't really hurt somebody, obviously in the all that stuff. But it's a really fun kind of way. It's at the end of the slalom races, and it's honestly just a really fun way to just kind of charge in plastic boats with a lot of your friends, your competitors, at the end of the race, and it's really fun too.
And I think the IOC is like looking at this for a potential like another kayak event in future Olympics. Do you
Yeah,
know anything about
so
that?
yeah, so it is an Olympic sport in 2024. So yeah, it'll be in Paris in 3 years or 2 years.
So are you targeting that in addition to like men's K1?
Yeah, I definitely am. I think, unfortunately, you might have to make men's kayak team, so being the top in the nation, to do both. I think they might just send one athlete and have them do both, but I'm not
That seems
totally
kind
sure
of
how it
dumb.
works yet. Yeah, they're basically trying to expand, add another sport without adding athletes. So
That seems kind of dumb because it seems like you kind of almost want people who are specialists in motocross racing.
oh, for sure, it's definitely a different sport. I think a lot of the reason why I'm good at it is just because of how aggressive I am in plastic boats, just from doing a lot of creaking. So I think it's really a different skill.
Something really interesting that you said just a minute ago was that you're the world champion of this extreme slalom format that they have there, but you're unclear on some of the rules.
Yeah, it's not really well written out. Like the sport, I guess, like the rules of the sport. A lot like there's a few rules that are just a little unclear, but most of it is pretty kind of it's pretty self-explanatory, I guess. Um, but I do wish that they put a little bit more time into kind of fixing all the little things that make it a little weird sometimes. Like for example, you can't do any protests, so they can just kind of disqualify you for basically anything that they deem is inappropriate for the event. If you hit someone, or if you look like you're charging at someone and hitting their body or whatever, they can disqualify you, and you really can't say anything. Unlike the other slalom events where you can inquire and you can protest if against penalties you get. So
Yeah, it seems like rubbing's racing, like especially in that format, you kind of want people to be like right next to each other because that
yeah,
also makes it
exactly.
exciting. So, were you following? I know EJ qualified for the extreme slalom team and did some Euro races this year, and then
Yeah,
had they had a time trial format, which I thought was kind of foolish. And then I think he got knocked out like kind of early, and he had a pretty long like Facebook post about like so kind of some of the same things you're saying, like unclear rules and some structure improvements that are badly needed to
yeah.
take the sport into being like better. What do you Were you following any of that, and what do you think about it?
Yeah, I was with EJ for a few of the races, at the end of the season. I did two of the World Cups with him, and I guess he was just there for World Championships. I did the two World Cups, and then I went to the Senior Worlds where he was there, and yeah, he had a great time racing. He just a lot of the rules, kind of like what I was saying before, they just weren't really as clear as they should be for an event at this. If you're calling it a World Championships, I feel like it should be a little bit more thought through. But I think EJ was saying that he did get some progress talking with them. They're all listening to him, so hopefully there should be some improvements by the time it happens in 2024 in the Olympics.
And when you won that world championship race for the prestigious title of extreme slalom world champion, what boat were you battling?
I was paddling a Ripper.
Is that the boat of choice for that race? Is that what everyone paddles?
A lot of people either paddle a Ripper or a Chili. Basically, a fast half slice is kind of the desired boat for that race. You want to be able to turn really quickly, but also have good acceleration and kind of be quick in a straight line.
Did you see that EJ's company is like going to make a plastic boat
I
specifically
saw
for that
that.
event?
Yeah,
What do you think
I
about
heard him
it?
talking about that in at Worlds back in when I was in Europe, and yeah, it's cool to see the CAD, and I think it's going to be interesting. I'm curious about what the boat's going to look like in person. I think it's really hard to balance having the bow narrow enough to be able to take really vertical and strong strokes. I think I really like the Chili because the how narrow the bow is. I'm able to take strokes almost like it's my slalom boat. However, with the narrow bow, it doesn't stay on top of the water as well in the waves and in the white water. So it's really about finding that balance for that fast boat. It seems like a lot of companies are making boats for this now, and it seems like there'll be a lot more choices. So I'm curious to see what people use.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very curious to see, what EJ is going to bring to market with because his his stated goal obviously is to have a boat that's competitive for that race. And if you've been following EJ for his whole career, you know that the one thing he's never won is an Olympics, and this is a route that he could take to feasibly achieve that goal. So I'm interested to see if that's where he's going towards with a very like a hyper competitive boat, and if there'll be like various versions of it.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what he's got in mind. I think it'll be a cool boat either way.
Yeah, I'm excited about it for sure. What else did I want to talk to you about? We've talked about slalom. We've talked about extreme slalom because you're the world champion. We've talked about your ridiculous tear in Mexico. What's next for you, Kaylin?
So I'm gonna be at home for most of the spring, doing a lot of slalom and just kind of usually during the spring and winter. I'm kind of usually at home doing school and just kind of training. And then I'll go to Europe in the summer, do a lot of slalom races out there. And this summer I did some creeking races, so I'm hoping to do more of that as well. And then come back to the States kind of early fall. There's some longboat races that I did this year. I did the Green Race and the Russell Fork Race. I definitely want to get back on those runs. And I kind of want to know the course a little bit better. Hopefully have some better results this year. And then I want to do another waterfall trip at the end of the year. I have some more ideas. I think Mexico or Chile could be sick,
Oh
and
boy.
then maybe Zambia like early January if that comes together. But we'll see. I have
Yeah, I
all the
think
things I want to do, and then we kind of have to just piece it in as the year goes on.
it's going to be exciting to see what your other ideas are and how they come to fruition. I think this has been super great for people to kind of think a bit more carefully about what they're thinking about and saying their thoughts out loud and how that's going to help them in the future. So I think they'll really appreciate your help on that one, Kaylin. Where can people find you on the gram, on social medias?
Yeah, so I think you're searching my name in any of the social media like Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, just Kaelin Kayak, or even I think if you just search my full name, but I have a long last name, so just Kaelin Kayak. You should find me on Facebook, Instagram.
And that's Kaelin, right?
Yeah, Kaelin Kayak.
Kaylyn Kayak, my man. All right. We talked about some good stuff. I am very excited to see what the future holds for you, Kaylin. This has been Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking Podcast. We will see you in a future episode. Peace.
Thanks, Seth.